The snow fell in soft curtains outside the orphanage windows, piling high against the weathered stone walls that had been Eliza Reed's only home for 17 years. She pressed her forehead against the glass, watching her breath create foggy circles that expanded and contracted with each exhalation. Tomorrow, she would leave this place forever. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Montgomery. Eliza ran her fingers over the simple cotton dress that Sister Agnes had helped her mend for the occasion. It wasn't a wedding gown by any measure, just her Sunday best, with the frayed hem carefully tucked under and stitched. The sisters had told her she should be grateful. Mr. Montgomery was a respected man in town, a widower of considerable means who had specifically asked for her hand. At 48, he was more than 30 years her senior, but the alternative was being turned out of the orphanage, with nothing but the clothes on her back, now that she had come of age. "It's for the best, dear," Sister Agnes had said, patting her hand. "You're fortunate he chose you. A husband, a home, security. These are blessings for a girl in your position." But as Eliza watched the snow drifting down, she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to marry for love rather than survival. Morning came with a pale winter sun that did little to warm the bitter chill. Eliza stood before the small mirror in the dormitory, pinning her auburn hair into a modest bun, while the other girls watched in silent fascination. Some looked envious. At least she was leaving. Others seemed relieved it wasn't them being handed over to an old man they barely knew. "You look pretty," whispered 12-year-old Mary, slipping a tiny sprig of dried lavender into Eliza's hair. "I saved it from summer." Eliza's eyes welled with tears as she hugged the child. "I'll come visit," she promised, knowing even as she said it that Mr. Montgomery might not allow such things. The carriage arrived promptly at 10. Mr. Montgomery didn't come himself. He sent his housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, a stern-faced woman with steel grey hair pulled tightly beneath her bonnet. "We haven't all day," she announced, barely glancing at Eliza as she gathered the girls' meagre belongings. "The master wants to have the ceremony before supper." The journey across town passed in a blur. Eliza had rarely ventured beyond the orphanage grounds, and the sight of grand houses with their warm lights and smoking chimneys made her heart ache with a lifetime of longing. When they turned onto Willow Lane, Mrs. Winters pointed to an imposing stone mansion set back from the road. "That's Thornfield Hall, your new home." The house loomed against the winter sky, its many windows like watchful eyes. It was beautiful, in its way, stately and proud. But something about its silent grandeur sent a shiver down Eliza's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Mr. Montgomery was waiting in the drawing room. He stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, the other holding a crystal tumbler, half filled with amber liquid. He was a tall man, still handsome in a severe way, with salt and pepper hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes were a startling blue, the brightest thing in the somber room. "Miss Reed," he said, setting down his glass and approaching her with measured steps. "Welcome to Thornfield." Eliza dropped into a curtsy, as Sister Agnes had instructed. "Thank you, sir, for your kindness." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "You may call me Edmund, though not in company. Mrs. Winters will show you to your room. The Reverend will arrive at 4. I trust that gives you sufficient time to prepare." Before she could respond, he had turned back to the fire, effectively dismissing her. Mrs. Winters led her up a grand staircase to a bedroom that was larger than the entire dormitory she had shared with 7 other girls. The 4-poster bed was draped in blue velvet that matched the heavy curtains, and a fire crackled in the grate. "You'll dress here," Mrs. Winters said, placing Eliza's worn satchel on a bench at the foot of the bed. There's a gown in the wardrobe. It belonged to the first Mrs. Montgomery. The master thought it fitting you should wear it. Alone in the room, Eliza opened the massive wardrobe to find a cream-coloured dress of fine silk, yellowed slightly with age, but still beautiful. She reached out to touch it, then drew back her hand as if burned. Wearing a dead woman's wedding dress seemed an ill omen, but she had no choice. The ceremony was brief and joyless. The Reverend spoke the words. Edmund repeated them in his deep voice, and Eliza whispered her responses, feeling as though she were sealing some terrible fate with each syllable. There were no guests, no celebration afterward, only a quiet dinner in the formal dining room, where the clinking of silverware echoed in the silence. "I hope you find your accommodations satisfactory," Edmund said as they finished their meal. "Mrs. Winters will explain your duties. I expect an orderly household." "My duties, sir?" Eliza asked, confusion clouding her features. "As mistress of Thornfield, the menus, the household accounts, social obligations, Mrs. Winters has managed in the interim, but these are traditionally the domain of the lady of the house." "I see," she said, though she didn't. The sisters had taught her to read and write, basic arithmetic, and household skills, but nothing about managing an estate like Thornfield. "And of course," he added, his eyes travelling over her face with sudden intensity, "there are your other duties as my wife." That night, alone in her new bedroom, not Edmund's, she discovered with relief, Eliza stood by the window, watching snowflakes swirl in the darkness. She was married now, to a stranger who had bought her as one might purchase a mare at auction. Whatever lay ahead, she had traded the familiarity of the orphanage for the security of these walls, and there was no going back. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came a gradual thawing in the relationship between Eliza and Edmund. He was not cruel, simply distant, often closeted in his study with his books and correspondence. Emerging mainly for meals and occasional social calls, Eliza learned the rhythms of Thornfield Hall. From the early morning deliveries to the evening ritual of locking up, Mrs. Winters proved an exacting but not unkind instructor, teaching her how to manage the household staff and maintain the standards Edmund expected. "He's particular about his tea," the housekeeper explained one morning. "Earl Grey, steeped precisely 4 minutes, with 1 sugar and a splash of milk, no more." These small details of Edmund's preferences became a map Eliza followed, trying to navigate her role as his wife. She discovered he enjoyed poetry and sometimes read aloud from Wordsworth or Byron in the evenings. He disliked loud noises and disorder of any kind, and he rarely touched her, save for the occasional formal kiss on her hand when they had company. Their physical relationship was infrequent and mechanical, a duty he approached with the same detached efficiency he applied to business matters. Eliza endured these encounters with quiet resignation, staring at the ceiling and waiting for them to end. Afterward, he would return to his own room without a word, leaving her alone with her thoughts. One afternoon in late April, Eliza ventured into the gardens, which were beginning to bloom with daffodils and crocuses. She had taken to spending time outdoors whenever possible, finding the vast rooms of Thornfield oppressive, despite their luxury. She was sketching a particularly vibrant tulip when a shadow fell across her paper. "You have talent," Edmund said, studying her drawing. "Did the sisters teach you?" Startled by his sudden appearance and unexpected comment, Eliza fumbled with her pencil. "No, sir, Edmund. It's just something I've always done. My first wife was artistic as well," he said, his expression softening with memory. Charlotte could capture the essence of a person in just a few strokes of her pen. It was the first time he had spoken of Charlotte beyond factual references. Eliza hesitated, then asked, What was she like? For a moment, she thought he would walk away or reprimand her for the personal question. Instead, he sat beside her on the stone bench. She was full of life, he said quietly, always laughing, bringing music and color into every room. We were young when we married, both just 20. We had 15 years together before the fever took her. Eliza studied his profile, seeing the grief still etched there more than a decade later. You loved her very much. She was everything to me, he said simply. Then seemed to remember himself. His face closed off again, the momentary vulnerability vanishing. The gardener tells me you've been asking about expanding the kitchen garden. The abrupt change of subject was like a door slamming. But Eliza had glimpsed something human in him. Something that gave her hope they might eventually find a way to truly communicate. Yes, she said, accepting his retreat. I thought we might grow more herbs and vegetables. The cook says it would save on market costs. He nodded approvingly. A practical suggestion. You may proceed with it. That night at dinner, Edmund surprised her by asking about her life at the orphanage. Eliza spoke hesitantly at first, unsure why he was suddenly interested, but his attentive silence encouraged her. It wasn't so terrible, she explained, pushing her food around her plate. The sisters were strict, but fair. We had enough to eat, lessons in the mornings, chores in the afternoons. Some of the younger children came and went, adopted by families, but after a certain age, your chances diminished each year. Yet no one chose you, he observed, watching her closely. Eliza met his gaze steadily. People want babies they can shape, not half-grown girls with memories and opinions. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. And what memories do you carry, Eliza? Who were you before the orphanage? The question pierced her like a physical pain. I don't know, she admitted. I was 4 when I arrived. Sister Agnes said. A constable brought me in, found wandering near the docks. No one ever came looking for me. Edmund was silent for a long moment. A mystery then, he finally said. Perhaps that's why I was drawn to you when I visited the orphanage that day. There was something in your eyes. A quiet strength I found. Intriguing. It was the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given her. Eliza felt a strange warmth spreading through her chest. Not love. She was far too practical to mistake this moment for that. But perhaps the beginning of understanding. Summer brought garden parties and social obligations that Eliza navigated with increasing confidence. Edmund's friends were initially curious about his young bride, studying her with calculating eyes that measured her worth by her manners and appearance. Eliza learned to wear the fine dresses Edmund provided like armor, to smile and make conversation about topics she had studied specifically for such occasions. You're adapting well, Edmund told her after one particularly successful dinner party. They were in the library, a room that had become a neutral territory where they often spent evenings in companionable silence, each with a book. I'm trying, she replied honestly. I want to be a credit to you. He looked up from his volume, studying her face in the lamplight. You are more than that already, Eliza. You've brought order and grace back to Thornfield. I made a wise choice. The words were still transactional, acknowledging her value as an acquisition rather than a partner. But Eliza found herself absurdly pleased by his approval, nonetheless. Perhaps this was what marriage would be for them. A gradual building of mutual respect, if not passion. That night, when Edmund came to her room, something was different. His approach was less clinical, his hands lingering on her face, her hair. When he kissed her, there was a hesitancy that hadn't been there before, almost a question. Eliza, surprised by this change, responded instinctively, allowing herself to participate rather than simply endure. Edmund drew back, searching her face. In the darkness. You needn't pretend, he said, his voice rough. I'm not, she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she felt, only that she wanted for once to bridge the vast distance between them. Afterward, instead of leaving immediately, Edmund remained beside her, his breathing gradually slowing to match hers. Just as she thought he had fallen asleep, he spoke. I never intended to marry again, he said to the darkness. After Charlotte, I couldn't imagine anyone taking her place, but a man in my position is expected to have a wife, an heir. When I saw you at the orphanage, so different from her in every way, I thought perhaps I could fulfill my social obligations without risking my heart again. Eliza lay perfectly still, afraid that any movement might stop his unprecedented confession. I didn't consider that you might gradually become necessary to me, he continued, the words careful, measured. Not as Charlotte was, but in your own way. It wasn't a declaration of love, but from Edmund. It was extraordinary. Eliza turned toward him, finding his face in the dim light filtering through the curtains. I never expected to marry at all, she said softly. At the orphanage, they prepared us for service, or if we were very fortunate, apprenticeships, a husband, a home of my own. These were dreams too extravagant to entertain. Edmund reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with unexpected gentleness. And now? Do you regret your fate? Eliza considered the question carefully. No, she finally said. I am grateful for Thornfield, for the security you've given me, and I think perhaps we might find a way to build something meaningful between us, with time. He didn't respond with words, but his hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining in a gesture more intimate than any they had shared before. When morning came, Eliza woke to find him still there, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. As summer turned to autumn, a subtle shift occurred in their relationship. Edmund began inviting Eliza to join him on his mornings, rides, teaching her to handle a gentle mare from his stables. They took lunch together in the garden on fine days, and sometimes in the evenings, he would ask her to read aloud while he sat with his brandy. Eyes closed, listening to her voice, shaped the words of Austen or Dickens. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a companionship neither had expected, a gradual thawing of two souls, long accustomed to isolation. Then, in October, everything changed. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a lawyer from London, who requested a private audience with Edmund. Eliza, busy planning menus for an upcoming dinner party, thought little of it until she encountered her husband emerging from his study, his face ashen. Edmund, what's happened? He stared at her as if seeing a stranger. A remarkable thing, he said, his voice hollow. It seems you are not without family after all. The world tilted beneath Eliza's feet. What? The lawyer represents a Mr. James Harrington of Boston. Your maternal uncle, apparently. He has been searching for you for years. Eliza sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. I don't understand. How could he find me now, after all this time? Edmund's expression hardened. It seems your parents were not vagrants, as the sisters assumed, but wealthy merchants. They perished in a shipwreck returning from America. You were with your nurse when the news came, and she, rather than contacting your family, absconded with you, perhaps intending to ransom you. When that proved too difficult, she abandoned you near the docks. And my uncle has been looking for me all this time, Eliza whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Yes, Edmund said, his voice strangely flat. And now he has found you. He's quite rich, the lawyer says. no children of his own. He wishes you to come to Boston, to take your rightful place as his heir. The implications crashed over Eliza like a wave. Family, wealth, a life beyond Thornfield. But as she looked at Edmund's rigid posture, the carefully controlled expression that couldn't quite hide his distress, she realized what he must be thinking. "You believe I'll go," she said quietly. "That I'll leave now that I have a better option." His laugh was bitter. "Wouldn't you? A young woman tied to an old man, suddenly offered freedom and fortune. I'm not a fool, Eliza." She stood, moving toward him until they were face to face. "No, you're not a fool. But you're wrong about this. About me. Am I?" His eyes searched hers, looking for lies, for calculation. "Yes," she said firmly. "I won't pretend I'm not curious about this uncle, about the parents I never knew. But Thornfield is my home now. You are my husband." Something like hope flickered across his features before he suppressed it. "You needn't decide immediately. The lawyer will return tomorrow for your answer." That night, Edmund didn't come to her room. Eliza lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. The orphan girl within her marveled at the revelation. Parents who had wanted her, an uncle who had searched for her. The woman she had become thought of Edmund, of the careful relationship they had been building, brick by brick. Before dawn, she rose and dressed. Making her way through the silent house to Edmund's study, she found him there, as she had suspected she would, seated at his desk, a nearly empty decanter beside him. He looked up as she entered, his eyes bloodshot. "You should be sleeping." "So should you," she countered, crossing to stand before him. "I've made my decision." Edmund straightened, bracing himself visibly. "And I want to meet my uncle," she said, watching his face fall. "I want to know about my parents, to understand where I came from." She paused, then continued more softly. "But my home is here, with you. I won't go to Boston." He stared at her, disbelief, warring with desperate hope in his eyes. "Eliza, you don't need to sacrifice yourself out of some misplaced sense of duty. Our arrangement is no longer merely an arrangement," she interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "Not to me. These past months, I've come to care for you, Edmund. Not out of gratitude or obligation, but because I've seen the man behind the walls you've built. I've glimpsed who you are when you forget to keep your distance." Edmund rose, unsteadily, circling the desk to stand before her. "And who am I then?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Eliza reached up, placing her palm against his cheek. "A man who has known great love and great loss, who guards his heart fiercely but still, sometimes, lets it show in small kindnesses, in the books you choose. For me, in the way you listen when I speak, in the garden you let me redesign though you preferred it as it was." His hand covered hers, pressing it more firmly against his face. "I never intended this," he confessed. "When I brought you here, I wanted a wife in name, a mistress for Thornfield, nothing more. I didn't want to feel anything again." "I know," she said simply, "but you crept past my defenses, with your quiet strength and your stubborn dignity, your refusal to be pitied, or to pity me." His voice broke slightly. "I find myself thinking of you even when you're not in the room, wondering what you would say about a passage I've read, or how you would solve a problem that's arisen." Eliza felt tears gathering in her eyes. "Is that love, Edmund? Or just habit?" His laugh was soft, genuine. "Perhaps love begins as habit, as the gradual realization that someone has become essential to your days." He drew her closer. "I don't know if what I feel can match what I had with Charlotte. It's different, quieter, slower, but it's real, Eliza. And the thought of losing you to this uncle, to a life across the ocean. You won't lose me, she promised. We'll invite him here. I'll learn about my family, about who I was meant to be, but who I am now, who I've become, belongs at Thornfield. With you. Edmund drew her into his arms then, holding her as if she might disappear. I don't deserve this second chance, he murmured against her hair. Eliza smiled through her tears. Perhaps not. But you have it nonetheless. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of revelations. James Harrington arrived from Boston, a jovial man in his 60s, with Eliza's auburn hair and the same slight tilt to his smile. He brought photographs of her parents, a handsome couple standing proudly before their shipping office, and stories of her early childhood, filling in the vast blank spaces of her memory. You are a serious little thing, he told her, as they sat in Thornfield's drawing room, Edmund watching quietly from his chair by the fire, always with a book, even before you could read the words. Your mother said you made up your own stories to match the pictures. Eliza absorbed these details hungrily, piecing together the family she had lost. James explained how he had traced her through shipping records, parish registries, and finally to the orphanage, only to discover she had married just months before he located her. When I heard you'd been wed to a man old enough to be your father, I feared the worst, he admitted candidly, glancing at Edmund. But I see now I was mistaken. There's genuine affection between you. Edmund's eyes met Eliza's across the room, a silent communication that had become familiar. There is far more than affection, he said, the public acknowledgement making Eliza's heart swell. Though I understand your concern, the circumstances of our marriage were unconventional. James insisted on settling a substantial sum on Eliza. Your rightful inheritance, he called it, making her wealthy in her own right. Edmund, to her surprise, supported this arrangement without hesitation. You should have your independence, he told her when they were alone. I never want you to feel trapped at Thornfield, staying out of necessity rather than choice. As winter returned and snow once again blanketed the grounds of Thornfield, Eliza stood by the window of what was now their shared bedroom, watching the white flakes swirl, just as she had that first night as a bewildered bride. Edmund came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. What are you thinking? He asked, a question that had become habitual between them. I was remembering my first day here, she said, leaning back against his chest. How terrified I was. How certain that I would never belong. His arms tightened around her. And now, Eliza turned in his embrace, looking up at the face that had become so dear to her, the lines etched by grief and time, the blue eyes that now watched her with undisguised tenderness. Now I know that belonging isn't about where you came from, or what name you bear, she said. It's about finding the person who sees you clearly and loves you anyway. It's about building something together, day by day, choice by choice. Edmund's smile was soft as he brushed a kiss against her forehead. For an orphan girl who married an old man, you've become remarkably wise, Eliza laughed, the sound filling the room that had once seemed so forbidding. Perhaps wisdom comes from recognizing how little we know about the paths our lives will take. She reached up, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this, finding my family, finding myself, finding love with you. I thought my heart died with Charlotte, Edmund confessed quietly, that I would go through the remainder of my days feeling nothing but echoes. You taught me otherwise. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, Thornfield's walls, the warmth of their unlikely love, held winter at bay. Not the fiery passion of youth, but something deeper and more enduring. A love built on understanding, on seeing each other's broken places and choosing to stay nonetheless. In the end, it wasn't the heartbreaking story Eliza had feared on that snowy night a year before. It was a story of second chances, of healing, of finding home in the most unexpected places. In the arms of a man who had married her for convenience, but learned against all odds to love her completely.